Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Inside Fashion Design. Today's community conversation, I'm very excited to be featuring Miguel Huidor, and he's based on the East Coast and joining us from there. And he has quite the background. I did a little bit of, I've known you for a little while now, but I did a little bit more digging about your background just because I'm so curious about people's journeys and then how they end up to where they are today. And you have not only over 20 years of design experience, but you also have your MBA from MIT. You have a MFA from Yale in the School of Design, both super impressive. And over the course of all of that, you've made your way into the digital landscape. And I noticed too, in your background, well, you were VP of design at Calvin Klein, PVH, for many years. And even back then, I think it was about 2014, you started working on 3D and digitization through PVH, which back then it sounds like way ahead of the times. So that I thought was really fascinating. And so you've got several years under your belt in that world of digital creation and experience. And so I would love to hear from you kind of a high level overview of how you did make your way into more of the digital landscape and then what you're doing now with all of that and with your consulting. And yeah, you've shifted from actual design work to all of this digital DCP, digital product creation. And so, yeah, if you could start there, and then we'll dig into your presentation today and what you're going to share with us. And I'm super excited to, I just think this is a great opportunity for even smaller brands, because that's one thing I was asking you is it sounds like a very big undertaking that would be very costly and a big shift that maybe a larger company could do. But when you and I, in our conversations and preparing for this, explaining that this is good even for startups, for smaller brands, and such a great way for even the little people, the little brands and, those independent designers to have a way to streamline their process, reduce their waste, the speed to market, all of those things are still very attainable for the smaller designers, independent designers and small brands. So that's really where I was very excited to hear that. And I know you'll go through how that's possible today. So I'll pass it off to you to start off with just sharing a little bit about your journey, and then we'll dive into your knowledge and expertise about the digital space.
Sorry, I think it's my screen is reflecting on my glasses. All right. Thank you, Britta. Thank you for that. And thank you for everyone else for joining. Yeah, I definitely have had a very interesting career path. I actually, my MFA was in costume design. So I actually worked as a costume designer for over 10 years throughout the United States and internationally. And then I moved into fashion design, as you mentioned, and I was at Calvin Klein for over 10 years. At the end, a VP of design for menswear in North America and all the other Americas. So it was a really great experience. And definitely, I think, when I was there, as you mentioned, we did start kind of getting into DPC around 2014, 2015. But I remember meeting with, some of these 3D companies even earlier. And I think what's really important for people to understand, because I think there's a lot of hesitation still, is the technology was not great back then. It is leaps and bounds better now. So there were too many limitations when I met with them early on around like 2010, 2012. But even by 2014, it had advanced so much that we started to explore it. And we were actually doing it through our vendor. And this is something I'll talk about in my presentation. Like if you're not ready yet, there's great ways to partner and get started. And then, part of the reason why I left Calvin Klein and went to get an MBA was I actually felt very technology back. I was becoming very technology backwards, and I was just seeing all the exciting things going on in the world with technology and artificial intelligence and 3D. And so I kind of really wanted to get back in there, but then also for two other reasons. One was I really want to support fashion designers and building brands and building companies. And I've just had so many friends try to start brands and not succeed. And I think there's a lot of business fundamentals that are kind of missing from, fashion designers' educations and kind of things like that. So I've been working with several small brands, but that's part of like my thing is like, I want to help these small startups become the next big brands that are out there. And then the other reason I really kind of started focusing on the technology was just the sustainability aspect. And, there's so much going on with sustainability and natural resources and production. And you'll see really the main point of my presentation is I just think that this new digital operational model is just leaps and bounds better than the way we're working, and can just have greater and more immediate impact environmentally, and I'm going to show examples of that. And so this is where, it's interesting. You mentioned this is good for small brands. I just spoke to, I have some case studies, but I just spoke to a major vertical mill from Peru literally last week, and they're very much in DPC. And his comment was, this is more adopted by small brands because they're more agile. And this is why I think it's important for this presentation for small brands to consider this, because it's about like, you don't have the history that could bog you down. You can make these changes. And with the young brands that I'm working with, they're all really eager to adopt these technologies because they just want to be different, and they just want to be more efficient, and they just want to think differently, And so I think this is a great, presentation for small or medium-sized brands because it's easy to shift. It's a lot more manageable. And again, part of what I'm going to be presenting to you is that it's going to be a lot more efficient for lean and scalable growth, so that you could become a bigger company and not have the huge operational expenses that are normally associated with that. So that's kind of my history. Thank you so much for the chance to speak with all of you. So as you see here, follow me on LinkedIn. You feel free to reach out to me at any time. And then I'm going to go ahead and get started with this presentation. So really, just to recap, I'm going to be discussing the digital end-to-end operational model. So really, this is kind of where the industry is going with digital product creation. And what I want to show you in this presentation, that it's just not one thing. It's actually this huge suite of tools that changes the entire business model for apparel brands and operational model. So in the agenda, really going to start off, I'm going to just do a recap of the physical op model just to compare and contrast, so we can kind of like remember, know where we are, know what's going on, and then just really how the digital end-to-end model is different. And then the final section will be kind of building digital end-to-end. So in this section, there's going to be a lot of information. So please ask questions if you have them, but I'm going to kind of start to discuss all the new tools that are out there that really will help support the brands. And again, you don't need everything at once, but you kind of build it up as you start to grow. But I just want to show how if you have this whole suite of tools, the way you run your company is going to be completely different than the physical model. And then, we could have Q&A at the end, but feel free to ask questions in the chat. Britta will pause me and pose the questions. So let's get started. So I kind of already said this in the beginning, but really like my thesis for the digital end-to-end is really about the benefits. It's about a faster calendar, improved decision-making, reduction of waste and cost, real-time collaboration, lean growth, and a positive environmental impact. So this is really what I want to try to convince you of in this presentation. So first we'll start as a quick recap of the physical op model. So we know the physical production model. We know the calendar is slow, right? When I was at Calvin, we were probably at 60 weeks. We got down to maybe 48 weeks after a lot of work, but it's a slow calendar. Part of the reason is it's a very linear format. And I'll show you that in the next slide. But really, because of this linear format, decision-making is dependent on prior and following steps. So again, this is what's adding time to the calendar. It's very repetitive, right? Anytime something is added or dropped, you're starting your whole cycle all over again. And then associated with this, there's a high percentage of waste and cost because of all of these different factors. So to look at the calendar, This is basically how I worked at Calvin, so I just built it off of Calvin, but you see all the different steps from initial design review to getting protos, to fittings, to salesman samples, and then at the very end, you're finally at, getting product to your customer. So as we know, that takes a while. But what we also know is this. This is the craziness that I was talking about, where it's very repetitive. You get to your proto review, you have adds and drops, you have to start all over again. Then you get a little bit further and you have adds and drops, and then you have to start all over again. Then there's all the back and forth, all the way throughout. And even at the final buy, we're starting all over again, because you might be adding some final colors, some final styles, or you're making changes that aren't exactly what it is. So this is just the craziness of what we live in right now. And this is what results in calendars that are like over a year long. So part of why I want to kind of show this is how it impacts decision-making. So when we think about the physical calendar, decision-making is made without clear product concepts, and it's very high risk, right? So even at this early stages, as we're going through line reviews and proto reviews, and we're having to start to sort the line and put dollars behind it, we're looking at line sketches, we're looking at prototypes that are in the wrong fabrics and the wrong colors. So there's a lot of information. And the decision-making is dependent on the timeline, right? So your merchandising team can't do anything until you've gone through all these steps, so there's a lot of dependency on time. And then when we get to the last stage, the salesman samples into your buy, there's even more decisions that need to be made. And this is, again, where putting the dollars is still pretty risky. You might have some samples, some things probably didn't execute, but you still had to put dollars behind it. And this is where I think there's a big challenge. Then I want to talk about resources and waste. When we talk about sustainability, in this first section, all the drops and adds, just to go through your first round, you're producing fabric, you're acquiring trims, and then you might drop half those styles. So then that fabric goes to waste, and you have to reorder more fabric and reorder more trims, right? So this is a little bit where the waste cycle starts to get out of control. And then you get to the end, and maybe you delivered on all your salesman sample SKUs that you needed, but then your adoption rate is 20 to 40%. So the majority of the work is still going into waste. It's still lost dollars and lost resources. So to give you a case study, this was a vertical supplier that is pretty global, and they have the major athletic and athleisure brands. And this is the information that they shared. So with all of their major customers, they create 550,000 samples a year. So this is just your sales samples. And they have a 15% adoption rate, right? So out of that 550,000 samples, only 15% are going to get used. And that equates to over 300,000 meters of fabric being wasted. So this is where I just go back on the sustainability angle. All of these fabrics could be sustainable fabrics. They can all be recycled yarns. They could all be, low water usage, low energy. What does it matter if they're all getting thrown away still, right? You still went through the whole process of producing everything. And then this is the environmental impact that it's having. And this is where I really kind of push. I feel the operational model can have a much bigger sustainable impact than just natural resources. And it's something to really kind of think about. So now I want to move into the digital end-to-end. So basically what digital end-to-end is digital tools with synchronized communication from the start of the product life to the end. And what I want to show in this little chart illustration here is it all revolves around your 3D assets or digital product creation. So it's basically these digital samples that really allow the communication and allow for the real-time collaboration and synchronization of all your departments. And as you see here, you have your planning teams, your marketing teams, your consumer insights data teams, your selling teams, your production teams, sourcing, development, and design. All of this is connected, and this is where the efficiencies of digital end-to-end really comes through. So Part of the benefits of DPC are faster response and shorter calendar, the synchronized collaboration that I just kind of showed you in this chart, the real-time decision-making that it allows with being able to see very visual items much sooner. And it de-risks the financial investments that are, very heavy in the physical model. So in this workflow, I put the circle in terms around, this is what I see as the synchronized collaboration. And now this is what your production calendar can look like. So as opposed to the linear model that you saw before, you still start off with your line plan, color, and concept, and then you still finish getting to the customer. But everything in the middle can now be synchronized. It can be real time, and it could be collaborative. And this is where the time savings really comes into play. And so with this kind of production model, you can now go down to a 3 or 8 month calendar, depending on your product line and your fabric lead times. Let me just, so when we're talking about the physical model, one thing I would want to really talk about is the decision making. So I'm a designer, so I believe I have strong visualization skills, right? So, for the designers, we were always, oh, but it's going to look great. It's going to look great, but this is what the merchants are looking at. This is what the buyers are looking at. This is what they're looking at line drawings. They might be looking at Illustrator sketches. They might be looking at pencil sketches. They might be looking at fabric swatches or CADs or just Pantone colors. So it requires a lot of visualization to be able to say, okay, I think that's going to look good. We're going to put dollars behind it. So this is where the physical model is at the disadvantage and why a lot of money is wasted in that model. With digital end-to-end, you can now look at this. So now I know what this dress looks like. I know what it looks like in all the prints and patterns. It's in 3D. I can rotate it and look at it from every angle. And with the digital fabric properties, I know what it's going to drape like approximately. So if you're showing this to your merchants and to your buyers and to your sales team, they can make such better decisions because they have a clear idea of what they're booking. And this is exactly what I'm talking about the timeline. Normally, you would have to wait till salesman samples to get to this stage. So you would be 6 to 8 months in your production calendar. You could be doing this in your first month. And this is the big time savings. So when we take all that into account for digital end-to-end, then we look at where can we reduce the waste that's currently being made. Fabric waste, right? So when you have a better idea of what colors you like and what prints you like, you don't have to put fabrics into work that you're not going to use. You could reduce sample waste. By going into digital salesman samples, you can reduce the amount of actual physical salesman samples that you will need. So as in that case study, instead of adopting 20% and wasting 300,000 yards of fabric, you can adopt 80-90% because you can plan a lot leaner. Shipping, what I'm going to show you is, there's carbon footprint is huge. I would feel guilty in a fitting when I was only changing a sleeve by 1/4 or 1/2 inch, and it have to fly half a way around the world. We wait 4 weeks, fly all the way back just for me to say, I like it, right? And this is just not isolated. This is a lot of going back and forth. And this is really where carbon footprint reduction can really kind of come in.
Hey, Miguel.
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I'm having flashbacks to a lot of the buyer meetings that we used to go to, and the buyers would want to see the actual garments, which is probably still very common. And we would bring every single item that we had in the line plan. We would hang everything up on the wall. And then, they wanted to see it in reality, and they would touch and feel, maybe put it on a model, and then they'd pick 2. Yeah. So all of that, it was, our old process, and huge amount of waste, and the time that you're talking about, and the development costs, for everyone along the way of getting that done, and then shipping them back and forth and all of that. So yeah, it'll make such a huge difference if the buyer can visualize that on the 3D and just pick from there. So that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I want to state that I didn't say at the beginning is with DPC and digital end-to-end, it doesn't mean you're never going to work in physical. You know, you still have to finalize your patterns in physical. You still are going to get, you know, your final set, you know, at the very end in physical, you know, for your records and, you know, maybe for your fancy showrooms and things like that. But it's really just more, you can make decisions faster and earlier, you know, without having to produce all those samples only to get to pit, you know. And I think this is the great opportunity. And I'm even talking to mills about this to be like, why develop 1,000 fabrics when I'm only going to pick 10? You can show me highly realistic renderings of fabrics and I could tell you what I'm attracted to. And then you just build off of that, right? So it really touches everything, you know, and I think that's a really great example. And then the last point on this is the poor sell-through. So again, what I'm going to present to you is a lot of tools out there that let you capture data and consumer insights so that you can actually book better, book leaner, and just have better sell-throughs, which again, it adds to the productivity of the company. So this is throwing numbers at you, but I really want to kind of illustrate the kind of cost savings. So in this example here, this is more like a medium to large size company. You know, I built it out as like 400 salesman samples to be booked, but you needed about 10 sets for all your different showrooms. At Calvin, we had probably like 9 showrooms that our apparel had to go to. So, you know, in this example, that equals 4,000 salesman samples. So what I calculated was, if you have a development rate of 1.65, which would be about a 35% adoption rate, it would average $363 per salesman sample. So for your total SMS cost, it would be $145,000 just for your salesman samples for this line. Utilizing digital product creation, let's say you're at 80% DPC, so 80% of your salesman samples are 3D assets, and the other 20% are physical. Your adoption rate could be much tighter. So here I have it at a 1.1, which would then bring your average salesman sample cost for what is actually being produced still physically to $48 a piece, a garment, with a total of about $20,000. So that's saving $120,000 on your line just by moving into this direction. And that money can be put into other resources in your company, you know. So this is a little bit where I want to show like the cost savings is real and it really is quantifiable when you start to look, and especially as you grow. If you're a small brand and you have 20, 30 samples, yeah, it's not going to be huge. But when you're getting into brands, we would literally have a line. My line was 1,500 SKUs and we would have to order 9 sets. So that's a lot. That's a lot. All right, any other questions so far on that before I go into this?
Kind of more of an observation, and I'm loving this presentation so far, putting in perspective of large and small companies and current clients that I have. But it also seems like there is more opportunity at every stage for input back from the retailer, your customer, whoever they are, that it's just intrinsically more interactive.
Yes, and that's what I'm going to start to touch on in this section is like
reading your mind.
The different kind of tools that are out there for you to communicate with your divisional teams as well as consumers and you know, of your wholesale, you know, your customers and things like that. So definitely, and I think this is the added value. You know, we all talk about we want to serve the consumer first and we want to be able to respond quickly. Well, you can't do that if you have to wait 1.5 years to get product to them. And I think the advantage of this is it could be a lot more immediate. So thank you for that question, because that's a great segue into this section. So now I'm going to go over building digital end-to-end. So really, this is going to be a lot of different kind of tools that are out there, but I want to show you how the industry is shifting and what other technologies that are coming in to support this and that are really kind of driving the great results. So first, when we're talking about building digital end-to-end, you know, it starts off with your PLM and your workflows. So really kind of considering what those tools are. Then we're going to look at the 3D apparel software. So this is where digital product creation comes in. These are the software that create these 3D assets. Then I'm going to touch on how this applies to sales and merchandising and how you can use these 3D assets for that. And then consumer insights and engagement. So then go into data and then also interacting with your consumers in new ways, still utilizing everything that you now have in 3D. So just as a refresher, this is kind of the end-to-end model, right? So everything starts around the 3D asset, and these 3D assets can interact with everything here, and everyone can interact simultaneously together through this different software. So just wanted to refresh that. So first, we'll talk about PLM systems. We're all familiar with PLM systems, product life management systems. What I want to mention is now that we're progressing into the digital age, now that brands have 10 different channels that they're selling through with social media and everything else going on, digital information is accruing drastically. So there's actually some new systems that have been built and brought out to support this. PIM, product information management systems. These are your data systems that are really used to capture your data in real time. And then DAM, digital asset management systems. These are for organizing all of your digital assets. So it could be your 3D renders, it could be photography, it could be anything that's a digital asset. But as everything is exploding, these tools are now really necessary. And a lot of the PLM systems, the major players, they built in their own PIM and DAM. But what I wanted to show you was that the major players in PLM, Centric, Flex, Infor, they all have really great suite of tools that kind of have been updated for 3D. But then also there's PIM and DAM systems like Pimberly and Binder that are out there that again, you can just kind of Google and look up, and they have standalone products as well. But I have to say, when I've seen these and just the chaos we were going through at Calvin of having to write copy and updating something and then realizing it didn't go to this channel or that channel, these tools are essential. And this is where I talk about the automation and the time savings and the reduction of operation costs, because you don't have to have really big teams to manage all of that anymore. So then I want to talk about the digital workflow. And this is exciting. And this is probably one of my favorite companies that I'm really excited about right now. They're called Vibe IQ. And what they have really pinpointed, the major problem that we're all facing right now is you might have Excel and you might have your PLM, and then you have Adobe Illustrator, and then you're on Browseware, and then you're using PowerPoint, and you're using Miro, and you have your data over here. Well, guess what? None of them talk to each other. So if I have my line sheet and my account exec changes a price, I have to manually go everywhere else and adjust that price. With this suite of tools, it actually synchronizes everything. So when you change something one place, it automatically gets updated everywhere else. So I think it's really an exciting tool. This is where automation is really going to be great for small or growing brands. This is where the lean growth comes in. So it's going to eliminate manual updates. It replaces the software stacks that don't communicate, and it's going to reduce errors and time wasted. And this is where errors happen, and these errors cost money. So with Vibe IQ, they actually have 4 products. The first is the planning product. So this is basically your Excel spreadsheets. It's very, they basically built their own Excel, but you can import all your current Excel documents. So you don't have to freak out that you're going to lose everything. But this is basically where, your buyers, your merchandisers, the line assortments can be created, all the data can be put into it. Then they have a board system. So this would be kind of like Miro. So this is where your design team can start to put together concept boards, start to put together rough sketches where everything can live. Then they have Showcase. This is for presentations. So this is basically your PowerPoint to build out presentations. And then they actually have Showroom, which then lets you take all of your 3D assets and create these 3D virtual showrooms. But what's exciting about all of this, as I had mentioned, is any change that happens here, any change that happens here will get updated everywhere else. Any change that happens here gets updated everywhere else. And I think that's huge. For someone who lived who worked at a very big corporation, it was chaos all the time, when things got changed and just the due diligence that you had to do to make sure everything was updated and corrected. So I think I'm very excited about this workflow, and I think this is a very exciting tool for like small to medium-sized brands to start looking into and start to really kind of streamline what they're doing. So now to mention the 3D software. So there's a lot of companies coming out. I only focus on what I consider to be the top 3 in my personal opinion, which are Browseware, Clo, and Style3D. Browseware is probably the most used for enterprise level apparel. It's very production friendly. So I think it's a really great program. Clo is actually, it's more used for smaller companies and independent designers. Part of the reason is Browseware only does enterprise contracts, licenses, whereas Clo, you could do individual licenses. So I have my own individual license for Clo, so I could create all my stuff all the time, and it's very affordable. They both do very similar features, and this is where I tell brands, it's like you have to kind of play with all of them and see what's gonna work best for your team. They all have pretty much the same suite of tools with merchandising and trims and BOM and PLM integration. So I think they're pretty much on par. It's just gonna be a preference. And then Style3D is one of the newer ones. And I was actually very excited by when I met with them and looked over their product. They're mostly in Asia right now, and they're expanding heavily into Europe. And then they're kind of coming into the US as well. But they have a really great suite of tools as well. So to me, these are kind of like the top 3. And then there's a lot more out there as well that are coming up. But this is where you're going to get started for your 3D product creation.
Hey, Miguel.
Yes.
How is the learning for those? Is that something that if you sign up and you get your account, is there tutorials or some sort of education that, yeah, a designer can go in there and kind of self-learn?
Yes. So that's exactly right. You know, like they might give you like a week of teaching, but let me just tell you, someone who's been using Adobe Illustrator and the Adobe Creative Suite since it pretty much came out in the late 80s, early 90s, you know, 3D is different. It took me about 6 months to feel really adept at Clo, you know, so it took me like at least a month or 2 to start to get it, but it took me 6 months to feel like, okay, I could kind of build what I want to build. There's a high learning curve for these programs, but once you know them, then it's pretty interchangeable. So when I got onto Browseware, I was like, okay, it's different, but it's the same, right? So kind of the concepts are the same, the way the things work are kind of the same, just the format and interface will be different, but technically they all function the same. But it is a high learning curve. They all offer, I'm a big fan of what I call YouTube University. Yeah. Basically, and anytime I have a question, I just type it into YouTube and I find a video for the answer. So that's how I keep building up my Clo skills, is every time I'm stuck on something, someone has made a video about it. So they all do that.
Yeah, I did see a lot of YouTubes when I looked up Clo 3D. And I have one more question too. So if there's design and then there's tech design, like designers and technical designers and pattern makers. So are they all using this in different ways? Like the designers using it to get more of a visual 3D, the fabric drape, and then the pattern makers are also using it for creation. So there's all these different people that can use it in those ways, right? Is that?
Yes. And the workshop that I teach for Cotton Incorporated, which is a full day, I go into that in a lot more detail. But yes, they all offer really great technical capabilities for pattern making and technical design. I am going to go into that next, but I'm just going to show you like one slide, whereas in my other presentation I talk about like an hour for each section because there's a lot to do. But definitely, and this is where I think you know, a lot of people in your teams will be touching this. You know, your raw materials team will be touching this, your sourcing teams will be touching this, your product developers will be touching this, your tech teams and your designers. And then you might have teams that are more, you know, consumer facing, you know, who are doing videos and illustrations and things like that. So it's actually like, it has a great breadth of capabilities, and a lot of different people in your teams will be touching this. It's not just tech, it's not just design. It's like pretty much everyone. Okay, so to start off, you know, if you're not that familiar with DPC, really this is built around the 3D asset, or also referred to as a digital twin. So a digital replica of a physical garment built to manufacturing spec and physical textures. So this is an example of the physical garment. This is the actual dress. And then this is the digital twin. So it's basically the same pattern, the same fabric, color, but in 3D. So with digital twins, you basically import all your manufacturing patterns, your DXF files, with the grading, with everything there, and then you assemble it into 3D in the same sewing techniques that you would physically. The big call out for here, and this is where a lot of brands make errors, is you really have to be using physically approved patterns. Maybe you already fit in, you already got your blocks right, they're approved. A lot of people are trying to design things from scratch in here, and you get really wonky. And especially if you're not a technical designer, then that's where a lot of like the mishaps happen. So I always encourage, like, bring in your physical blocks that have been approved, and then you kind of modify them design-wise. The other major component of DPC is the digital fabrics. Now, this is not just a flat CAD. This is a fabric that has been analyzed through special machines to capture the physics properties of that fabric. So it captures the roughness, it captures the color, it captures the bend, the drape of the fabric, it captures the stretch, and it captures the opacity. So if you have something like chiffon, it'll capture the opacity of the chiffon. This is a whole other process. Again, I spent an hour talking about this alone and the other one, but just to kind of highlight, you know, within 3D, we're trying to make it as close as possible to the physical. So you're starting off with accurate patterns, and you're starting off with digital fabrics that are close to the properties of the physical fabrics. And then this is the video to kind of show how the TD team can work it. So what's exciting about this for technical design is you can now alter your patterns, as you saw on the right-hand side, and then you see it adjusted in real time on the left-hand side. Your avatars can be all your standard avatars. You can create them your own. Alvanon now has a service where they basically could take your avatar and give you the 3D version of it. So you definitely want to keep consistency between your physical form and your digital form. But what's great about this is, like, you no longer have to wait 6 weeks to change that waistline, you know, by ½ an inch. You know, you can see it in real time, bring in your designer and say, oh yeah, I like how that looks. I like those proportions better. Let's go forward. So again, really time savings within here. So the tech teams that, you know, they can adjust a lot of the measures, they can adjust the grading, they can make design iterations. What I'm not showing you here is there's strain maps. So you can actually do troubleshooting with, like, the tension might be wrong. And one of the exciting updates that just happened this summer is Browswear and Clo now have soft body avatars. So when you have something that's stretched and that's pulling, you now see the impact on the flesh of the avatar. And that's super exciting. I've been waiting years for that. So
yeah. So if you have your fit model, your real live person, you can plug in all of their measurements. So if you're doing petite sizing or you're doing plus sizing, you can take your plus size model and build your personalized.
And there's a lot of services, like within Alvanon and some of the other companies, you know, you can actually just set your fit model to get scanned, and then they will build the 3D avatar off of that, so that it's very, very precise, very, very much so. And what I'm showing you here in this video, this is in Browswear. Again, this is part of technical design. This is what I mean by the strain maps, that you can actually see on this last one here, how it's tighter around the hip. So even though it's been graded per their grading, they see on the avatar that's built to the spec, that's actually too tight. So the tech team can actually now adjust just that one size and then get it to the right tension and then move on. So again, a lot of this work can be done digitally now. You don't have to spend all the time trying to book your fit models and things like that. You can kind of see it in real time. So I think very exciting tool. And then when we get to design, you know, I think the biggest thing for design is, as I said, like, I prided myself on having great visualization skills, but this is even better, you know, like, to be able to create your silhouettes and you know what that silhouette's going to look like, to be able to rotate the garment in 3D, like, that's harder to visualize when you're trying to visualize everything. But now you can actually build it, and you can see where your seam lines are going, and you can see what's happening in the front and the side and the back. It's great for, you know, looking at color variations, look at prints. These are avatars and and the 3D dresses I created for this client, Maze, New York City. But like I'm able to build all her avatars to her body specs. I could bring in diversity. You could have the avatars look dressed up, dressed down. But then you can actually visualize all these tools. And what I'll show you later is this level can then go into something that's more consumer facing, so just be able to take that dress and then create like little editorial moments, and be able to use that in your e-commerce, in your social media, and it saves you a lot of money. This image on the right-hand side is a stylist, Michaela. She's a plus size stylist that works with Maze, and I created these images for her in like 4 different outfits. And then she did a test on social media to be, what's your favorite? So again, when we're talking about like immediate consumer interaction, like there's so much you can do, and again, people get excited about like, wow, that's 3D. And I actually use a photograph to get her face that way. So there's a lot of tricks and things out there, but you can really kind of replicate people.
Yeah, I was wondering if it looks half real and half not real.
Yeah. And this is a little bit like this image on the right. This is me using a 3D model, but a fake 2D photograph. If I built a real 3D environment, then you're going to get even more realism out of it. And that's what you're seeing more at the high level stuff that's commercially facing right now. This was just more a little quick and dirty, like, oh, let me put her in the garden. And I just plopped a photograph behind her, matched the lighting, and then got it to a certain point. Yeah. And then this is another example for another customer, for after, where she was she's a small brand in Ireland, and she's like, I can't really get diversity in my models. I don't have the budget to have more than one model. So for the new launch of this new dress and this new campaign, this was the model that she hired up here in the upper right hand corner. And then I was able to build more diversity. I was able to build avatars of all the sizes so that she could represent her extra small and her 2XL, so that, all her customers felt a little bit more included in the experience. And this is what I'm saying is like, you can take these 3D assets and start to use them towards e-commerce. And there's just so much more that you can do beyond just the digital product creation for like prototypes or salesman samples. But she basically built her whole website around this, and mixed, the photo shoots with the real model with the digital models. So then I want to show you this video here. This is from Browseware, and this is just a sample when I talked about collaboration. And I think, Lajini, you had mentioned this as well. Like you can start to create your own mood boards. You can start to create your own assortments. All of the programs, Browseware, Clo, Style 3D, they all have a version of this. And what's really great about this is, I myself had to carry like 30 giant foam core boards everywhere I went. You can now just do this and just share it with your teams. And you could build your mood boards. There's abilities for them to write comments and style changes so that you get alerted and you can make all the updates right away. So again, huge time saving opportunity here, to be able to make these kind of changes. And again, I would get a month's worth of changes at final market because everything was finalized at that point. This could be done much earlier on, and then my design team isn't spending a month making all the updates once market is over. So again, this is, I just think, one of the key things with DPC and digital end-to-end. You could communicate earlier, you could get more information earlier, you could make changes in real time, and it's just a huge win. So then as we get into, I mentioned I want to talk about sales and merchandising. So now there's all these tools. This is a company called Detail. They have a fantastic line assortment software. So basically it imports all of your 3D assets. So everything you see here is your 3D asset, your 3D model. You can also mix in photographs and things like that as you want. But basically what this tool does is it creates a very visual way of merchandising. So in my company, my sales team was literally looking at style numbers, right? Excel sheets and style numbers. And maybe you had a tiny little clip of something there for them to kind of figure out. Now with this, you can very visually, you can assort by department, you can assort by classification. But as you see here, you can start to see right away what your laydown is going to look like. You see the silhouettes, you see the colors, you see the textures. And then once you really get going, then you can do this. And this is also part of detail. They could basically build your floor set, so if you're a brick and mortar store and you have different footprints at your different stores, you can build all those footprints in 3D, and then you can merchandise everything with the upcoming line. So it's a great sales tool. It's a great tool to give to your regional directors and managers to set up the stores, because now they can look at this and they can like match it exactly because it's built to their actual exact floor plan. So it takes all the questions away. And then eventually you can actually turn this into something that's commerce facing and have customers walk in and browse and be able to purchase items within there. But yeah, I think this is like really exciting to be able to visualize the store. And at my division, we didn't have a floor set. We didn't have a room where we could actually map everything out. So everything was just done on racks. So this would have been such a huge game changer to be able to then like visualize what everything's going to look like on the tables that we had, on the hanging bars that we had, and all that. Okay, so that was merchandising and sales. Now I'm going a little bit more into consumer facing. So this company, Ventana, deals with the memory size of 3D assets. So one thing I didn't mention, which is important to mention, is 3D assets are very memory intensive. They're huge files. One object might be 90 megabytes or it might be 600 megabytes. Like these objects can be very memory intensive. And what you see in the image on the right is actually what's called the mesh of the garment. And the tighter the mesh, the higher the file size. So what Ventana does is they create the shareable 3D and AR web experiences. And they do this by optimizing your 3D objects. So you might have a file that's 900 megabytes and they could get it down to 90 megabytes. It's all automated within their software suite. I think it's fantastic. Again, they're big proponents of the 3D assets and 3D salesman samples. So, increasing the speed to market by months by being able to just work in this manner, reducing the carbon footprint, saving costs by reducing the physical samples needed. And then they also have information on, the kind of results they're getting from their customers, doubling sales conversions from online sales by the use of the 3D assets on your website, increasing cart sizes by 60%. So very e-commerce friendly. And then this company is just rock star. They're working with Amazon now. So if you're doing like Amazon shopping and Google shopping, your 3D assets can now be used and viewed in 3D and AR within those, as well as Canva and Miro. So let me show you the video of what I'm talking about. So this is, Diesel's one of their customers. And what you see on the right is the 3D version of that bralette. So now you have the 3D object. The customer can rotate it. They can look at all the details inside and out. This is for mobile and for desktop. And you can view this in augmented reality. So through your phone in the environment that you're in, you can actually see that 3D object in your phone with a 3D asset. And augmented reality reflects the light in that area. But they've been having fantastic success with customers, as you saw, like the increase in cart and increase in conversions. And the big thing I want to say about Ventana is they're a huge lifesaver for reducing the file size, just so that your systems aren't getting overloaded with all the memory that you're going to need. Another company that's consumer facing is Stage 3D. And what Stage 3D is, they're an interactive platform for rendering and making videos. So again, everything that you're seeing like online right now or in the media, they're like the top digital agencies in Europe that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to make those videos for Prada and whomever. They cost a lot of money. And what I like about Stage 3D is they're kind of like a do-it-yourself software. So this is great for smaller brands or mid-sized brands. It's very easy to build 3D environments. They have preset lightings and environments. It has really fast rendering capabilities. So when I make a video, and maybe it's like, it could be 5 to 10 seconds. It'll take 7 to 9 hours to process. And I have a very fast computer. So with Stage, it can make a video in minutes. So to me, like when I heard that, my mind was blown because I was like, I need that right now. On top of that, they can do batch rendering. So let's say you have your entire line in Browseware, you can then export it into really high def renderings all as a batch. And you don't have to have someone manually doing it one by one by one, which is also very time consuming. You can customize your avatars with Unreal Engine MetaHumans, and they can customize them for you as a service. And right now they're an exclusive partner with Browseware. So they're only through Browseware. They're a plugin through Browseware, but it's fantastic. So let me just show you this video. So what you're seeing here are, these are all 3D objects. These are all your 3D assets. And you could build studio lights, you could use HDRI environments, and you could create these little videos. And they're building off of this. They're gonna let you put multiple objects. They're gonna let you pan and stop and pause in different areas. You could build your own sets. And they're building lots of different special effects features into it. So I'm really excited about where this is going. And I think for brands who want to interact on TikTok and social media, this is a great way to create a lot of cool, simple videos yourself. So now we're getting to, let's check the time.
We're getting 8 minutes to 11.
Okay. All right. And I have a hard stop, so I'll try to wrap up. We're near the end. Okay. So the last one is maker sites. So this is about data. And I think this is, and testing, and I think this is where brands are not really taking advantage, is basically being able to test early. So at Calvin, if we wanted to test something, it would take 1.5 years before we had results. With this platform, you can actually use your 3D assets. You can actually use your 3D assets before they're even made, and you could get consumer feedback. They have about 30 to 40 million users. They can do by demographic, they can do by region. And this is the video to kind of show you just a quick thing. So the t-shirt on the right, that could just be a 3D asset. It doesn't have to be the physical asset at all. And they capture interest, they capture demographic information, so you can really start to make better decisions about what you're bringing in, especially when you're bringing in something new. Because again, I go back to the high risk. It's high risk to invest a lot of money on a new style with no history behind it. So I think this service is really fantastic, and I think it's very underutilized right now in the industry. So I'm excited to present it. And then I just want to skip to these 2 case studies with them. So, and these are perfect examples of what happens, right? In the first case study, this was internal. The sales and merchant team was always relying on bestsellers, and it was hard for the designers to bring in new ideas. So by being able to use the maker sites testing, they were able to test new concepts, and then they were able to increase the sell-in of new ideas for their line, on top of which reducing the need for prototypes and salesman samples. If something they didn't do well, they didn't even bother to make a prototype or a salesman sample. In the second case study, this was like a wholesaler example where the brand, their customer was very old school and I know what my customers like, I'm tried and true, I'm going to stick to this. So it was very hard for them to bring in newness. And they were able to do tests. They tested with the Gen Z demographic, and they actually showed that there was a high interest in the new colors and the new silhouettes that they were offering. And this increased their bookings by 82%. So again, this is where I just think the data is huge and the more immediate feedback is huge. No longer having to wait 1.5 years. Literally, they give you response within 48 hours. So really quick and efficient. All right, so that was kind of it for the technology. I know that was a lot, but I just wanted to kind of show you there's a lot of tools and a lot of touch points of how this can work, but overall, it's all about the efficiency. So then how do you implement this for your company? You start small. This is complicated, start small. I always say, start with something simple, like a t-shirt or an underwear, something that doesn't have a lot of trims. You wanna set your standards and you wanna set the expectations with there. And then you also wanna partner with your vendors. A lot of suppliers are offering these 3D services as a value add. So, that's how I got started at Calvin. My supplier was doing all the 3D for me before we started doing it internally. So partner with your suppliers, manage the culture change. You gotta, always show, here's the physical, here's the digital, get used to it. And then eventually the people who resist it will start to be okay with the digital. And there's a lot of opportunity for people to be more efficient with the digital. And that's usually a big way for them to change their minds. As your company grows, then you can start to upskill your employees within all these 3Ds. and then you just start to scale from there. Again, I go very in depth on all of this. This is just very high level, but moral of the story is just start small. Don't try to do everything right away. Figure it out, and then as you get success, build out your line. So as the recap for the digital end-to-end, it's about the collection of technologies that offer the development efficiencies. It's about the operational and cultural changes. It offers agility and lean growth through the automation and shortened calendars. And the 3D assets have more value to them and more use than just product development. And then the waste reduction and cost savings benefit brands, suppliers, and the environment. So to finish, change the way you work, make better decisions faster, and do it now. Not to be pushy, but do it now. All right. Sorry it was long. Thank you.
Yeah, Miguel, that was awesome. And there's so much information. We do have a question. Do you have recommendations for body scanning platforms? And if there's time, I have another question to follow up before you have to cut off.
Yeah, so there's a company called Evolution that could do body scanning for you, but also Alvanon would do body scanning for you. So if you already have Alvanon for your dress forms, I would just reach out to them. They'll body scan for you as well and convert that into a 3D. Or they will take your existing Alvanon form that you've already spec'd out, maybe to your fit model, and they can convert that into 3D as well.
What was the first one? How do you spell it?
Yeah, let me. Yeah, they're called Evolution. They're under this company called Human Solutions.
Okay.
They're the ones that, and they have fantastic body data as well.
Yeah. And so as you mentioned, you spend an hour going through a lot of these programs in your other courses, because you mentioned so many great tools, the Ventana, the Vibe IQ, and all of those things. So for viewers who want to try to implement this or check out some of these tools or reach you to help get this all situated, is it best just to reach out to you? I know you do consulting and you can help people get started. So what would be your recommendation?
So on this side, you see my website, mhuidor.com, and then also you could just send me an email. I think, and I offer the consulting services for that. So again, I think there's a lot of best practices that I could kind of go over, as well as a lot of more in-depth tools to use, depending what your needs are. And I think the big thing about this is it's all customizable in terms of what your product line is and the size of your company and how you want to implement that. So, but definitely feel free to reach out to me. You could via my website or just shoot me an email.
Yeah, and I would say even for those small brands like we were talking about in the beginning, if there's even one program that you can use, that would be the top priority, whether it's Clo 3D or Browseware, just figuring out what that one key element is to get started.
And I want to like emphasize, like the brands that I showed you, like all the imagery in my thing was all 3D, from brands that I worked with. And they were very eager to get into this because they immediately saw the cost savings. They immediately saw the value of being able to kind of get feedback from their customers right away. And that one brand, Maze, that I showed that had like all those floral dresses, she wants to use this as her sales tool because she's gone into wholesale now. She used to be just DTC. Now she's in wholesale. And now she wants to show new colors and new prints, but in the same silhouettes. So why spend $500 to make a new sample when you can just spend less than that and just recolor one of your 3D models? And you can use AR and send it to them in AR, and they can like rotate it in their living room or their office, wherever they are. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to just start playing around with it. I would say the 3D program is the first place where you want to get started, and then once you start to feel comfortable in that, it's then figure out how to start to use all the other programs.
That's awesome. I wish we could keep longer. I have more questions and we could keep chatting about this, but I know you have a hard stop. So I want to thank you so much. And if others want to stay on and chat or ask more questions, and I can always message Miguel. If anyone has a question, I can follow up with you. But thank you for your time and all this information. And people can reach out to you. There's your website, and feel free to reach out to Miguel if you have further questions.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. And yes, please, if you have any questions, shoot them to Britta. She'll relay them to me and I'll respond to everything I can.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. let me